Okay, good afternoon. Robert Young, Salt Lake Community College again. You know me, I know you. I hope everyone's doing good. I will tell you how much I miss you. I thought of it the other day. I was on Bangerter Highway and went by the Discover exit. And wow, I really miss you guys. I wanted to turn in and go in and teach the class, but unfortunately, that's not the case. So we'll make do. So I hope that everyone is doing well through obviously these challenging times. And just to reiterate, I would encourage all of us, myself included, to really take the actions that the governmental authorities have put on us very seriously, of trying to stay at home as much as possible. Obviously, when we do go out, social distance. I will tell you this, at Cincinnati Insurance, where I work, they're sending all of us masks. So I think when we go out, if we're going to go to a store or any other place, we probably ought to wear a mask. We really should. And then any counsel, advice, instruction you get from Discover, I would abide by that 100%. These people, have obviously talked to a lot of the physicians and other people who are making these decisions. And while no one's perfect, they're doing the best they can, for our benefit. And when you look at some of the challenges in parts of the world, let's just try to live as smart as we can and as intelligently, and we'll get through this. Sometimes it's difficult on a day in day out basis, but it's just something that we're going to have to endure. So I'm probably repeating everything that you already know, but I think the world of all of you, I miss you, and we'll just say that. I want to review a few things. First of all, later today, I'm going to send you a email to everybody and kind of give you an update and remind you kind of where we're at and where we're going. I would say, first of all, this is our third week of different assignments and different lectures. And so the first week, let's review, you had one 5-point assignment, and that is why would I not invest? Most of you have turned that in, obviously via email or text. Last week, we did what is one goal, or maybe two goals, just a couple goals that you may have as you set up an investment program, either now or down the road. And again, this is worth 5 points. So I would encourage all of you to get that into me. I'd say about, probably 55-60% of you have emailed that to me. The one today that I want to emphasize a little bit before we jump in more into investing is our budget. The budget is really an important element in this class. Not only is it worth 20 points, but what it can teach us, especially if we'll stay with budgeting for the rest of our life, as I've told you, is just so critical and so important. And the budget, of course, was to be done the months of February, March, and April. And then you turn in. Again, all I'm asking, because I am not interested, and quite frankly, it's none of my business what your day in, day out expenditures are. But if you will tell me at the end of April, 1st of May, that you've done the budget for 3 months and honestly done your best, realizing that nobody's perfect and you might have missed a couple of expenditures, hopefully not many. But if you'll tell me that, you'll get the full 20 points credit. You do not need to turn in the full budget because, again, this somewhat confidential information that really is, quite frankly, none of my business. I'm more interested just that you start this habit of budgeting. And of course, budgeting is we're writing down every expense. We set our budget categories early in January, or probably the middle of January, and started February the 1st. So we should have the categories set up. Hopefully at the end of the 2 months that we've done it, January and February, February and March, that you totaled your categories and kind of looked at it and say, well, this is how much I spent, this is what I budgeted, and just kind of see where we're at that point. That is the real value of a budget. That is the value that departments do at Discover, at Cincinnati, any other successful corporation, and certainly any other successful person or family. So, one of your 5-point assignments, you're going to have two, so you get 10 points today as you email this to me, is I would like you to just tell me how the budget is going. Just give me a line or two, and just, I don't need any of the details per se, but is it working? Are you enjoying it? Are you writing down all your expenditures? Is it frustrating? Is it harder than you thought? Is it a little disappointing when you look at where you're spending and maybe what your goals are? But let me know how the budget is going. Just give me a kind of we're 2/3 way, a little bit more than 2/3 through the assignment. I'd just be curious to know how it goes. And again, it's a general report. I'm not trying to be nosy. So anything that you want to report on that is fine. In addition, I just remind you the book report and term paper are due by the time we take the final, or actually the second exam, which will be the week of May the 4th, in about a month. Several of you have already turned that in. Again, I'm just looking for the written, and you can email that to me. Obviously, no oral presentation because of the way we're doing class now. Hopefully the stock assignment is doing good. The stock assignment is very important. You've got 10 stocks, in essence, worth $10,000 each, and you're following those on a weekly basis. This has really been interesting to follow the stock market. I mean, today, the stock market, and today is Monday, the 6th of April, has been up like 12 or 1,300 points. The stock market has really fluctuated more so than probably ever has. And so this just shows you in the stock market where you've really got to be in it for the long term. We've talked enough about that, long term being the rest of our lives, because you just never know where it's going to go. And as changes come, especially with our fighting the coronavirus, both here in the United States as well as worldwide, we'll continue to see these fluctuations. But I will tell you again, as you invest, choose a mutual fund or whatever direction you may have gone or will go, I'm very bullish on our economy long term in the stock market. And if you think about it, we'll talk about this in a couple of weeks when we get into retirement planning, talk more about a 401k, but your 401k is basically, even though you may not totally realize it, is basically invested for the most part in mutual funds. And of course, if you go in and look at your 401k from time to time, it's probably declined quite a bit in the last month or so. But that's okay. Obviously, we're a long way, all of you, from having to use it in retirement. And again, that's why we're in it for the long haul. The other comment I would make, a good number of you have watched the Susie Orman DVD. I've gotten a lot of great comments on it. I think she does an excellent job. Her 9 points for financial freedom are excellent to take a look at. They really dovetail perfectly, go hand in hand with Dave Ramsey, Dumping Debt, that we looked at about a month ago. So if you haven't looked at Susie Orman's, it's about an hour and a half. I would encourage you to do it. I promise you, you'll enjoy it. And then the week of April the 28th, we'll hit the highlights of that. And you'll get some questions on the second test. And all you need to do is send me an email and say, I've watched the Susie Orman video. If you want to give some thoughts on it, that is fine. All the emails I've gotten so far are very, very positive. So Susie Orman is wonderful and does just an excellent job. So I'm going to send an email to everybody later today or tomorrow morning. I've got everyone's email address, and I'm just going to highlight kind of where we're at, where we're going, and so you can check. And if you're missing one of these 5-point assignments, there's no problem with being late, especially now since we're not having the formal classroom every Tuesday from 3:30 to 5:30. I want all of you to get them in so you can get the credit, and also so you can kind of think these things through. So that should kind of tell you a little bit where we're at, where we're going. We're going to talk this afternoon about Chapter 15. So if you want to turn to 526, we're going to talk about bonds. Now this is, to me, probably not the most important chapter we'll look at because, quite frankly, I don't think too many of us are going to invest in bonds. To be honest with you, if we're going to really want to get into bonds, the best thing is to do it in a mutual fund. There are mutual funds, and we'll study a lot about this next week on our lecture on mutual funds that really digs into it. But there are mutual funds that just buy corporate bonds. But I want to talk a little bit about corporate bonds so that we can understand them. We'll also talk a little bit about U.S. savings bonds, which some of us might actually have bought. I know I have in the past, and actually there are some very good redeeming values about U.S. savings bonds. But if you look on 527, it says a corporate bond is a written pledge to repay a specific or specified amount of money in a given time period with interest. A corporate bond is actually a loan, and when corporations float bonds, as they say, they have to pay those back. They actually have to show them as liabilities on their balance sheet. And so sometimes corporations will float bonds, sometimes they'll issue new stock, sometimes they'll just borrow money from a bank or another lending institution when they need to borrow money. So they want to open a new plant, say Boeing wants to buy some new jetliners. But the bond market is one that they will use. If you look on 527, they give the characteristics of a corporate bond. There is a maturity date. The maturity date is when it will mature. That's usually 10, 15, 20, 25 years down the line. If you think of a U.S. savings bond, I would assume that some of you have maybe had U.S. savings bonds or have bought them. It's the same thing, except the amounts are small. That's the great advantage of a U.S. savings bond. But a U.S. savings bond usually will go for 10, 15, or 20 years. The face value on the bond, whether it's a small one like a U.S. savings bond or a large corporate bond, is the dollar amount that the bondholder will receive when the bond matures. The bond indenture is the legal documents or covenants that details the conditions of the bond. And bonds do pay interest. The interest rate is set, and they have to pay that interest. Bonds, though, do have risk. Now, U.S. savings bonds do not, because they're backed by the full faith of the United States government. As we mentioned, the three types of investments where there's absolutely no risk would be investing and putting money into a savings account, a checking account that's backed by the FDIC or the NCUA. That's number one. Number two are U.S. savings bonds. And number three are what we call treasury bills, which are also backed by the U.S. government. Now, corporate bonds do have risk because corporations, have risks. Like we buy stock, there are risks. Now, bonds, if you're buying bonds in large corporations such as Walmart, General Electric, some of those that were on the Dow Jones Industrial, here at Discover, at Cincinnati Insurance, not a lot of risk in those, and which is fine. Again, remember what we talked about, the relationship between risk and return. So if there's not much potential risk in a bond, such as General Electric or Discover, there's not going to be a lot of return. A U.S. savings bond has no risk, so hence the return is not real high. And hence, because of that, sometimes not a lot of incentive to actually want to put too much money into a U.S. savings bond. But corporate bonds, when there's these kind of wild gyrations in the stock market, we might really feel that, hey, this coronavirus is going to be here for a long time, which hopefully will not be the case, and the market's going to continue to slide, makes bonds more attractive because their returns are set. They're in the covenants, the indenture that we talked about. Now, the types of bond, a debenture is just a bond where basically you're relying on the reputation of the issuing company. That's what I mentioned, like Discover, Walmart, General Electric, companies like that, Coca-Cola, Disney, well known that we have a lot of confidence in. A mortgage bond is where the company pledges some of their real estate. Obviously, they'd be a little bit more risky since they're having to put their real estate up. Convertible bonds on page 529 can be converted into common stock. They're what's known as high yield bonds on 529. Now let's just think about what we've talked about, risk versus return. If we've got a high yield bond that offers good return through the interest that it's paid and the potential for growth, obviously there has to be more risk. Now again, as I said, there's nothing wrong with investing in something that's a little bit more risky if it fits in our risk appetite, number one. And number two, we have good diversification. Again, we would only want to put a small percentage of any of our investments in a risky bond or a risky stock for that matter. Basically, the repayment provision on page 530 for a bond is called a sinking fund. A corporation or a public entity for that matter who sets up a bond is required by law to put money into what's known a sinking fund every 3 months or 6 months. That money is to be invested in certain low risk, conservative type investments, and that money is used to pay off the bondholders in the future, because remember, bonds are shown as a liability. In fact, if a corporation cannot make its bond payment, they immediately go into bankruptcy, and every now and then that happens. So the sinking fund is set up for that. Now, on page 531, it talks a little bit, why do investors purchase corporate bonds? And basically, I think it says, for the most part, if you look on 532, is that the interest is guaranteed by the contract. If you've got a good company, you know you're going to get the interest. Now, the thing is with a bond, sometimes these are better for older people or people who are retired, because you have to take the interest in cash. Remember what I said about dividends from a stock or a mutual fund? We want to reinvest it and get more stock so that we can build our investment and have compound interest work for us and not have to pay the income tax if it was a cash dividend. The interest income, though, from a bond has to be paid in cash. So hence, if you receive that in cash, then you have to pay both federal and state income tax. So people like to have the cash flow, especially if they're older, maybe retired or close to retirement from bonds. That's number one. Number two, bonds, if you get the right type of bond, will appreciate in value. And bonds kind of run counter to the stock market. If you think the stock market's going to take a bit of a downturn or a bear market that we talked about, a bond might be a good way to go. So that is generally why people go with corporate bonds. Okay, I'm going to stop right here, and I will go to the second part. As you know, you get these in two parts because it loads up YouTube too much. So I'll be with you in a second.